Hello and welcome to this lecture. What we're going to talk about is opacity in different ways you can play with the multiply layer and the dissolve of your images. So what we have here is a simple design that I made. So this is just a stock free image of an apple. We've also got, as you can see here, we zoom in, a little pencil. And essentially what this is for an ebook. So what this is for an ebook. My sister teaches different languages on Udemy as well, and for just other purposes as well. She teaches French and pretty good at teaching those languages. So what we wanted to do was design something that was fun, very open. And obviously, as a teacher, it's cool to see an apple and a pencil within the logo, so that's what we did. What we're going to talk about is how I made it look a little more cinematic. So what we have here is a flare, and the way we did that was through the opacity. So let's just toggle this on and off again. So as you can see right here, we have a source of light coming in. So it also adds more of a three-dimensional aspect to the image, because having a practical source in the top left corner, it gives reason to the light being reflected on, the apple here, but then it also makes it a little more cinematic. It makes it, a little bit more lively, which is really cool. So let's get right into that. And then in the next lecture, we're going to talk about how you could do drop shadows. So if we toggle on and off the apple, you can kind of see the difference there, and you could see that it's adding quite a bit to the image. And we're also going to talk about saturation with this as well. And I'm going to show you how all this kind of plays together. Now, when we go to the lens flare, so we have our other images here where, I wanted to brighten it up. But if you go to the lens flare, in the bottom right corner, we have this opacity. Now it's set to 20%. You can change that by hitting this drop-down menu. And as you can see, if we go to 100, this is going to show 100% of this image. Now, all these images are stock-free images, so you can go to, I believe it's Pixel Bay, or if you go on Google, you can find royalty-free images. So these are 3 free images. But what you can do is when you add your overlay, you wouldn't want to put this all the way to the top because it would cover your image. But what you want to do is put it on the top of your backdrop images. So on top of the greens that I have here for my images, if I put this underneath, even this one, it would be on top of it, but you are underneath it. So you want it on top of those, but you want the text going on top. But anyway, you grab this opacity, and as you bring it down, it's going to let that lens flare creep in without it being too intrusive. So I found that about 20% it worked. I wanted it to be subtle, but not too eye-catching. I actually find it looks good at 25 to 50 really. So even if we go to 50, it's good, but it darkens the image too much for me because we wanted more of a lively feel. I just dragged this over to the left. Yeah, even 25 is kind of nice. It just depends on what the feel you're going for. This I like. I like the contrast that it's adding. It's nice and dark here, brighter on the left. But anything at 15 or 20 looks good because we want a more brighter feel. And it comes down to your story, and it comes down to what are you trying to portray. If this was supposed to be dark and grimy, you could do that through the opacity. Now, if you see this drop down menu here, we're set to normal, which I like for this particular project, but we do have dissolve, and that's going to add a lot more noise to the image. And what I like about Photoshop now is once you scroll down, you already get a preview as to what this is going to look like without clicking. So I could be on normal, and I could drop down to say lighten, and it'll show me what that'll look like. For me, multiply looks good, darken, so it's just going to add a little more flair to your image. So if you do a color burn, And then you let this here, we'll set it at 50 with these so we can see a little bit more of what it's doing. This is basically going to add its own little preset to your image. So obviously if it's an image or more color, you would have more of a color effect, but this is simply a lens flare. So it's simply a harsh source of light in the top left. And then that's just going to give you a practical source for your images. Again, overlay looks really good. It's not really disturbing the color of the backdrop. A lot of this is kind of playing around, but if you think about it in a logical sense, this is kind of what it's doing. Now I find this works good. Overlay is nice and normal. They're quite similar, and that's what you'll find depending on what image you're using. They're all quite similar. So again, 20 I like. You could also type it in. So I could just type in 20 and hit enter. And again, with the images, we could also bring down the opacity of, say, the apple. And that would make it a little bit darker, which would make sense. And then again, obviously you can lighten it with your image, and we'll talk about that as well. But in a nutshell, that's going to be your opacity. So whether it even be your text up here, you select your layer and bring down the opacity of your text, and you could start adding effects like that. If something's missing and something looks weird, it could be that too, so just be aware. Again, if we go on the apple and we bring, say we make it darker, because it's a colored image, you can really see what this effect is doing. For me, most of the time, I am going to do a multiply or dissolve. So you want to keep it simple when you're getting started. So that, in a nutshell, is going to be your opacity, your multiply layer, and start thinking about how you can utilize different effects for your image to do that. Same thing with this layer here. It's just a, if we show just that, let's do that. As you can see, this is just a simple green layer that we're adding, and it just makes everything bright in the end. And you can utilize opacity for that, or you could just do a different gradient that you bring over. So with your bucket here, you can use your gradient tool, select your color, and on that layer here, I'll make a new layer because I want to delete it. You just drag this over and it'll be green to red, because red is our second color up here. So if I change the second color to let's say this green here, so we'll hit red, select green on our screen, which will be pretty similar to the one we have. We'll flip it. So to change through colors, you hit this little toggle right here. So we drag it right to left, and then that will add that. And then if I wanted to change this color, I can make it a darker green. And then up here, it'll go from light to dark, which could be a really nice effect as well. And then obviously it's going to change the angle of what you're doing. So if you think about it in a practical sense, this light is going to be very harsh, and it's going to get darker towards the bottom right. So again, you could start from even the source, drag it down towards the apple, and that adds a pretty nice effect. I like this a little bit more because of what we're going for, but you could, in a sense, make this a little bit lighter, so it's a little bit contrasted in comparison to your other source. We'll flip those to make it light to dark. And that's a pretty good image right there. So that's opacity and I guess a little bit of gradient for you as well. So next time you're working on projects, you don't have to just throw in an image. You could throw in an image and change the opacity and really fine tune your image. Mess around with the stuff. Again, you could play, it's nice to be able to play around with these colors, because you could also, here, let's see, in layer 6, go from darker to lighter. But obviously in this image, it wouldn't make much sense because our source of light is coming from the left to right. So we would want to respect that. So again, that adds a practical source, and mess around with this stuff, and you're going to take your creativity to another level. We'll see you in the next video.